The forest was covered with snow. Someone shouted during the storm. It was a woman's voice. The girl was asking someone to wake up. The girl was very excited. She was calling the man by name. The man's name was Dillion, but it was as if the man heard nothing. He didn't hear the girl. His eyes seemed to be going round and round. His eyes were already distraught. And suddenly it hit her. It was probably something coming out of the man. The girl watched him carefully and realized that it could be dangerous for her. The girl needed to stop this as soon as possible. She asked him to step back. She asked him to get away from her. Was the Dillion really deaf? But the man had already grabbed the girl by the neck and pulled her against him. The girl at this point needed to do something as soon as possible. She stretched out her hand and tried to feel for something. The first thing that caught her friend's eye was a rock. The girl repeatedly told him to get away from her. She clenched the stone in her hand. Once again, she asked the boy to wake up, and at that moment, she hit him with the stone. The thing is, this guy she just knocked out is Dillion Signs. He was the young heir to the family of the Duke in Sinais, whose influence bear comparison with the Emperor. He was also called the Messenger of Death, and the Grey Cardinal of that book into which the girl had fallen. The man was also known as the Cursed Monster Duke. The man had a peculiar appearance. He had many thorns on his neck. These spikes grew from his heart all the way down to his neck. It was the cursed mark. And the moment her power burst out, all life around him would wither away. And that's when the girl knocked out that monster Duke. But she couldn't just leave him to die. So she brought him home and nursed him back to health. And he, after he came to his senses, he did not realize where he was. He also did not realize who he was. The girl was dumbfounded that being hit by a rock caused amnesia. Maybe it's a good thing he lost his memory. Dillion asked me to be honest. No more hiding the truth from him. But the girl did not understand at all what he wants to hear and what he thinks lies under this truth. The young man asks most likely the girl was difficult, because he is an aristocrat. The girl wondered if he remembered everything. She hadn't told him he was an aristocrat. The logs crackled in the fireplace. He confessed that at the mere sight of the girl, his heart starts to race. His head starts to split from pain and his judgment becomes cloudy. Most likely it was because the girl had hit him. The young man apologized once more for what he had forgotten. The girl stood looking at him in surprise. The young man knelt down in front of the girl. He said he would take full responsibility. And the girl only looked at him in surprise and did not understand what he meant. He had misunderstood everything. But the man immediately took her hand. The girl was a little embarrassed and could not say a word. The girl tried to explain it to him in some way. Dillion said he would never leave her again. At that moment, he passionately put his lips to the girl's hand and kissed it. At that moment, the young man called the girl his dear wife. He looked into her eyes with such tenderness and love as no one had ever looked at her. The girl was dumbfounded. Did he really think she was his wife? No, it was not as he had imagined. Yes, that girl was in the book. She was the Virgin Saint Aina. She was the main character in the book. Aina, the saint who got the power of the gods, and the three guys who protect her. These three guys were called Crown Prince Cassis, Lord of the Schumann Magic Tower, and Paladin Fabian. This book is a romantic fantasy about how these heroes protect the world from evil. Strengthen, darlings. As if testing Aina ruthlessly crush the whole world. Aina sacrifices her life in order to keep the world she loves safe, but after her death, the empire collapses. All the people of the empire die, and that's how it ends. And the character she's inhabited in is just a little fly whose name isn't even mentioned. A student of the temple, Leah Deli. The action of the book hasn't started yet, so everything is quiet for now, but there's not much time left. We'd have to live in hiding and keep an eye on the situation. Leah stood with her arms crossed and thought about it. If she continues to live in the temple, it is possible that she will cross paths with Aina. She only remembered the temple as a place where holy power was exploited. And on this day, she had an opportunity to escape. Lily dressed in a black cloak. She wore a hood over her head. And the time was right. The time has come. It's time for her to get out of here as fast as she can. She didn't feel an ounce of guilt for wishing she was running away from that horrible temple. But at that moment, her eyes widened. She remembered some kind of relic. The vessel fell to the ground and light spurted out from it. The girl looked carefully at what was happening. After a moment, this light said hello. An owl-like bird flew out of the light. Its wings were very long and wide. The bird said its name was Naden. It also said that the girl had awakened it. The bird rose higher and higher above the girl. It looked down at the girl, and the bird's eyes were glistening with rainbows. The bird hovered over the girl. The girl fell to the ground and thought that now she would be finished. Why the storylines followed her. The bird asked where the girl was going in such a hurry, and the girl didn't understand why the bird was following her. She said that it was her guardian spirit and she was bound to it by a contract. The girl knew she could be caught for it, and then spend her life sucking the holy power out of her until she died. And now that she had the relic, she had no choice but to run. Nevertheless, she managed to escape from the temple in peace. After that, with the money she had, she traveled as far as she could afford. She headed for a village on the border. There she lived for some time earning money. They spent many days together with the Naden. So the owl became family for the girl. And so calm the girl planned to leave the empire before the events of the book began. But at one point she saw Dillion Sinais lying unconscious. The girl moved closer to the young man and looked at him. At that moment, a Nadon was sitting on her shoulder. The girl immediately recognized that it was the monster Duke. He was lying on the snow, and bright red traces of blood could be seen all around him. He was so helpless at that moment. Leah felt very sorry for him. She wanted to help him in some way. Well, the girl didn't understand why he was here, what she was going to do, how she could save him. So the girl decided to call someone for help. Nadine turned to Leah. She said he had a very serious wound. She thought he wouldn't be alive much longer. Leah had only one thing on her mind, and that was to save this man. Leah had holy power, and thanks to her, they should make it in time. At that moment, the girl closed her eyes. She thought about it and said, well, she couldn't just leave a man to die in the middle of nowhere, could she? At that moment, Leah asked on Dan to bring her a cart. The bird remembered everything and quickly flew to fulfill the girl's order. Leah firmly decided that she would fix him up and send him to the temple. As I told the Nadon, she was sure she had the strength. She knelt down in front of the young man. At that moment, the man grabbed her dress with his hand. Another second, and he opened his eyes. The girl was very surprised to see that he was awake. The man asked her to let him go. He didn't want to die here. The man mumbled something else and lost consciousness again. Leah was surprised to see that he had fainted again, and the girl asked the young man to open his eyes. She knew that she was in a very serious situation. Leah Delisa was a character in the book Saint Anna the Virgin, and here she was running from the temple, somehow stumbled upon a gray cardinal. The man was unconscious and had a serious wound. The girl, with the help of birds, and transported the young man to her house. She laid him on the bed. The man was very pale. She had brought him here, of course, because he was dying, but she didn't know what she was going to do with him. She couldn't leave him in the snow in the forest. Nadine turned to the girl. The bird thought Leah knew him from somewhere. The bird asked if there was something between them. Leah said nothing happened between them. She just knows him, and that's it. She knew his first and last name, Dillion Sinais. She also knew that the man had been cursed from birth. No one celebrated his birthday, only whispered among themselves. There were rumors that the eldest son of the Synapse family had been cursed, but no one knew why it happened. The mother looked at her child and just cried. She could not stop her tears. But one thing was clear to everyone, that this child was caught up in a factional feud within the clan. In order to get rid of the curse, and Helion's parents even appealed to the temple, well, that didn't help. The thorns spread further and further all over his body. They made him wildly hungry. Eventually, he started devouring everyone around him, even his parents. He couldn't help it. He didn't know what was right and what was wrong. It took him a long time to learn how to overcome that curse. The girl was lucky he didn't eat her too. For the moment, he pressed himself against the girl. Then I thought he was about to eat her, and she quickly grabbed the rock in her hand. She needed to protect herself. At that moment, she thought she was about to be finished. His cursed spikes had come up to the pikes, and that was a clear sign that the curse was breaking loose. His eyes went round and round. At one point, the young man stopped. Leah looked with frightened eyes and into his eyes. She hit him with a rock and tried to throw him off of her. At that moment, the spikes were spreading here and there. The girl didn't understand what was happening, and she clutched her head. Is there more to it? The man lost consciousness. Why the thorns kept sprouting. So he's definitely about to eat her. Well, at that moment, a brilliant idea occurred to the girl. It's a cursed power hungry for life. Perhaps then, girls need to use their holy power now. After all, this is also a kind of life. And she began to radiate holy power from her hands. Beams of light spread all around. It was as if butterflies were fluttering around them. She should try it. And she squeezed the young man's hand with her own. The girl asked me to please work with her power. She could have done it right away if she'd known. I thought she was a bit stupid because she didn't realize it straight away. At that moment, the girl asked the bird if they could escape. This man is actually very dangerous. I thought she should have brought him in for nothing. The bird told the girl not to worry. After all, no one ever kills their saviors. And it was true. And the girl lifted the blanket higher. She wanted to keep the man warm. Maybe the bird's right now. Man, I saved that man's life. I doubt he'd want to kill her, even though she knocked him out. And Leah's mind was very full of thoughts. And the thoughts were interrupted by an owl. She asked the girl not to get too close to him. I didn't understand why the owl told her not to get too close. The girl from behind stood looking at the man. He didn't have any sprouted thorns now. While the bird was still wary of him and said he was cursed, and that could be dangerous. I knew right away. I asked if she knew what the curse was. This curse was very, very old. This curse is about 1,000 years old. It can't be that serious. Now the girl understood why a girl in Inna couldn't even handle this curse. 1,000 years was an eternity. Leah asked the bird if there was any way to dispel it. The bird said it could. She can't do it herself. The general gist of the curse is that it is empty inside, so it devours everything around it. And the bird offered to send him off when he started. The girl said okay and quickly clasped her hands together. The girl asked God very much that she would succeed. She also asked for the Delian to forget about meeting her. When the girl opened her eyes, she realized that the sun was already high above the horizon. Turns out she'd fallen asleep. The girl stretched and yawned. At that moment, she heard someone turn to her and ask who she was. The girl saw that the young man she had rescued yesterday was awake and looking at her with surprised eyes. The girl didn't realize when he was the one who woke up. The man quickly lifted himself on his hands on the bed and asked the girl who she was. Leah was a little discouraged. What was she going to do now? She came to her senses a little and said in a stammering voice that her name was... Dillian thought the girl was very strange. Leah felt like she was going to lose her mind. She didn't even have time to plan everything and just fell asleep. At that moment, the man grabbed his head. He had no idea where he was. He didn't even remember who he was. Most likely, the young man had complete amnesia. Lilia was only glad of that. Was it really worth it, he said just now? He doesn't remember anything. The man remembered absolutely nothing. Not who he was, what kind of person he was. He couldn't even remember his name. And rejoiced, her prayers had been answered. I wonder how it all came to this. Is this the faint light at the end of a dark tunnel? Doesn't he even remember how they met? The man said yes. He doesn't remember anything at all. He doesn't remember their meeting. He doesn't remember who he was or what was in his life. Leah realized that heaven was on her side, and she mentally began to thank God. Everything had turned out just the way she wanted it to, just as she had asked God to do. The man looked at the girl carefully and froze. At that moment, he held out his hand to her. He ran his hand under Leah's eye. Asked her if she was crying. The girl's face became simply dumbfounded. Her eyes were wide open. She said she wasn't crying, just a little surprised. The book said he hated touch. What did he just do? Could it be because he has amnesia? The man caught her off guard by the fact that he had woken up so suddenly. At that moment, the young man was examining his hands. The young man asked the girl who he was. He's not just here with her. The girl was confused again, as soon as she wanted to say something. As a bird flew into the room, it quickly told the man that this girl had saved him and gave him life. Lily was a little angry with the bird. She didn't want the bird to tell the man all the cards. The girl was indignant, promised their identities to the others. The man was very surprised that the bird could talk. Leah grabbed my head at that moment. Bird said if he knew how much Leah had suffered trying to save him, and there was no thanks from him. Leah asked the bird to be quiet. After all, the young man had just woken up. At that time, the bird landed right on Leah's head. The man was amazed. He had never seen a talking owl before. And how could this be possible? But the bird quickly blurted out that she was no ordinary owl. She was Leah's spirit guardian. At that moment, Leah fixed her hair. She said she was a little late, so she asked me to call and introduce myself. Her name is Leah Delisa. She said she was a regular witch doctor. And the girl pointed with her hand to her bird. She said it was on the Dan, and she is her guardian spirit and an integral member of her family. How did the girl tell the man what his name was? His name was Dillian. The girl said he told her that before he passed out. The man stretched out his name once more and brought his hand up to his face and thought for a moment. His name didn't mean anything to him. The man asked if they even knew each other before. Leah said that she and he had just met, and they had not met him before. The girl said she had brought him here from the forest. He was unconscious and bleeding. The man was surprised. Had he behaved so ignorantly? The girl was stunned. She didn't understand how he was supposed to behave. Leah was surprised. Turns out this young man had manners. Or maybe it was just her imagination. After all, he didn't shed a tear in the book. One thought kept lingering in Leah's mind. What if he found out she'd knocked him out? What would she do then? Leah was dumbfounded. It was as if 1,000 bolts of lightning flashed before her eyes. What's happening now? Could it be Dillian himself apologizing to her? And if his memory comes back to him anytime soon, maybe he'll ask how dare she deceive him. Maybe he'd accuse her of trying to kill him and he'd apologize to her. Did she really think she could fool him? What if after all this a man wants this girl dead? What if he does want to kill her? No, it's okay that he lost his memory. You don't need to apologize for that. Well, the man apologized to her again. He bowed his head. At that moment, the line reached out to him in her hands. She took hold of his face, told him he didn't need to apologize to her. She just didn't want to hear it sorry. Well, the man asked please. He really wanted her to forgive him. He felt guilty about it. At that point, the man said, okay, thank you. Realized she was getting carried away and completely missed the way she clenched his cheeks hard. At that moment, the girl asked if the young man was hungry. With a smile, she turned away and said that she would bring him something right away. At that moment, she thought to herself, what the hell is she doing? Just as the girl turned away, the young man asked her another question. He had only one question for her. Is it true that he hadn't met her before? At that moment, Leah froze. She didn't know how to answer him. At this moment. She didn't understand why he was asking the same question all this time. The girl doubted very much that he suspected her of anything. She looked into his eyes. Did he really want to apologize? No way, even though he's lost his memory. Dillion is not that kind of person. The girl left saying that she had really never met him before. At that moment, the door closed loudly behind the girl. Leah understood. Now we had to get rid of him as quickly as possible, get out of the Empire before he remembered everything. But there was one but, and the girl reached out her hand for the tomatoes. I had to feed him anyway, but I still had to feed him. Leah dressed the front ones quickly and started to prepare the food. The man sat looking at his hands. He didn't understand what was happening to him. He considered his hands. Why did it all seem familiar to him? As if it had happened to him before. The man awed and leaned his head on his hand. And why this girl cared so much about him. Who she is. Maybe there's something she's not telling us. And the man decided to call an owl to him. Maybe she could tell him more about this girl. The owl herself was a little embarrassed. She said she actually had a name. Dillion said he wanted to ask her something. He asked who this girl was to him. Owl was outraged. Leah, after all, had told him herself that they had never met before, even though he didn't remember anything. But he saw when he woke up that she was sleeping next to him. She didn't want to hear him apologize and so gently touching his cheeks. She was very surprised to see him. How could this be? One thing was certain. This girl. The man asked not to be taken for a fool, even if he had lost his memory. It was, after all, just obvious that they were no strangers to each other. And the man smiled. Owl looked at the young man carefully. She realized that he was not as stupid as they had assumed and thought. But she can't tell a man that I nearly split his head open. At this time, the man sat and watched the owl carefully. He was waiting for her to say something to him. That she had nothing to say to him. Then the man said he would ask a little differently. He asked what he had done to her like that. Salma squinted her eyes and looked closely. She said he had done something terrible. But the young man wanted to know exactly what he had done. He didn't want me to hate him, but it was all mental. The young man realized that the owl didn't seem keen to talk to him. Why? Or maybe she got close to him out of self-interest. Or maybe she's led me somewhere dangerous. Maybe she's stalling for time right now. At that moment, an owl flew up. She sat even closer to the young man. The bird had only one. He looked at the owl carefully and was silent. At this time, he quickly put his hand on her head and pushed her. Owl was discouraged. Why is he doing this? The young man said that the bird was too loose, had not been taught manners by its mistress. She herself said that Leah was not her mistress, but it looked suspicious. The young man looked carefully into the Lee's eyes once more and asked what they were hiding from him. If the owl doesn't tell him immediately, he'll make her tell him. And as soon as the man fixed his gaze on the owl, the door opened and Leah walked into the room. She apologized for taking so long. The girl asked most likely they were already waiting for her. She held her food under her nose. The girl and the young man met each other's gazes. The young man was, stunned. He quickly took the owl in his arms. It was as if nothing had happened here. Suddenly asked Leah herself, is she really crying? Is it really all because of the bastard? I said she's just still in a bit of shock. She'd just been chopping onions for a long time and they got in her eyes. And the girl wondered why they were so surprised when she walked in. Maybe she looked so bad. And why didn't she look in the mirror before coming here? Without thinking long, the girl put the mushrooms on the table. The young man kept staring at her. There's no way that girl would want to kill him. She looked very fragile and kind. She didn't look like someone who would want to hurt anyone. An owl perched on the young man's head and pecked him. She said it was all his fault. The young man knew nothing, but it was all his fault. He may have acted like the ultimate scumbag. Leah's mind would have completely different thoughts. She thought perhaps the boy was angry because she had taken too long to cook, though she thought she'd done it all quickly enough. Dillion looked at the girl again and asked for his forgiveness. The girl looked at him again. Why does he keep asking her for forgiveness? Asked me to give him a chance to make amends. He had that confident look of a man who had got it all wrong. What was it he had just said? And the owl rejoiced. That was better. He definitely needed to be held accountable. But for what? And what was going on anyway? Leah said he didn't need to fix anything. He just needed to go back to his house. He would have wanted that too, but he thought it would be hard for him to come back before his memory came back to him. He apologized again and asked if he was a burden to them now. His look was very sad. The girl didn't realize what was wrong with his face. Now it seemed like she was somehow different. The girl started to shake. She told herself to pull herself together and not fall for his tricks. The young man said that he thought it was very dangerous to go outside in this weather. Leah didn't understand what was wrong with the weather. It was very clear today, and they both looked out the window at once. How could that possibly be possible? Ilya scooted closer to the window. It was indeed clear outside. The young man had said that she had saved his life after all. It would be a pity to lose her so stupidly. The young man said that he didn't want to make things too difficult for them, so he would try to repay her his debt soon. He was willing to do whatever she ordered. She could command him as she pleased. And the girl remembered the words of the bird. She told her that God loves people with holy power. At that moment, the young man started to eat the soup. Then why is this happening? Suddenly, the young man asked Leah to take care of him. At that moment, the bird flew up to the young man and asked him to eat faster, and after that he would have to go chop wood. Does she love him? Perhaps she does. But God hates him. Dawn had come. The sun had already completely flooded the room. A jar of sunflowers stood on Leah's windowsill. At this time, Leah was diligently preparing food. The bird didn't understand why the girl had changed so much, and to whom she was so diligently preparing food. As if the bird didn't realize who it was. Of course, she makes Dillion's food. With a little more stirring, she tried the soup. It came out kind of bland. The girl knew if she looked after him so carefully, maybe when memories came back to him, he would take pity on her. The girl said that there was not much to eat, but asked him to eat to his heart's content. The girl said that there was not much here, but asked him to eat to his heart's content. There was nothing on the table. Soup, pie, jam, sausage, cheese, and vegetables. The most surprised, of course, was the owl, and the young man only looked sternly at the owl. Leah asked perhaps the young man still wanted something. Suddenly the young man asked, "Does he annoy her?" Leah didn't expect such a question. She said of course not. The girl looked kind of disgruntled, and that's why he thought so. Leah said it was just her cheekbones were suddenly cramped for some reason. Dillion exhaled sadly. He had the impression that she was his maid. The young man motioned for her to sit beside him and eat with him, but the girl smiled cheerfully and said she wasn't hungry. She said she was going to eat later, but she was suddenly very hungry. She just wanted to eat separately on purpose. She'd probably get indigestion sitting next to him. And the girl heard her stomach rumble suddenly. Dillion, looking at all these dishes, asked, "She always cooks so much." Into the conversation ventured, "You said if she cooked so much." I also didn't understand why suddenly a girl who is usually satisfied with one slice of bread, such a lavish feast. Dillion guessed right away that it must be because of her. He said he was very grateful to the girl for her diligence, but next time he asked her to cook as usual. And the boy decided that they needed to determine a schedule of who would cook when. Leah realized it was all too obvious. She'd been working her arse off. Here was a girl saying that the young man was still too weak and needed to eat a lot. That's why she cooked so much. No one cooks like that every day. The boy once again asked if it was true. He had realized before that the girl was just trying for him. Leah wondered if the young man was just messing with her. Actually, he was joking, but he realized from the girl's reaction that it was true. Dillion bent down and tasted the food from the spoon. He said that the girl was wrong and he would not bully his savior. Leah was amazed. This young man could really joke. She had a different impression of him before. She thought he was callous and unfeeling, but in fact he wasn't. When the meal was over, the young man said he would wash the dishes himself. Leah tried to object. She said she would do everything herself. Dillion put on his apron and began to wash the dishes. The water seemed very cold to him. The girl stood beside him and begged him to let her wash the dishes herself. But the young man was undeterred. He said he had just a little bit left. It was unbelievable. Dillion Sines himself. What if his memories came back to him soon? And he'll say she's not making him do his chores, and he activates killer mode. Leah's biggest fear is that she thought he was going to kill her. But she talked him out of it, and he did the dishes himself. What difference does it make? Either way, she's going to die anyway. Greasy plates with cold water. It's clear that they're not going to wash themselves. The young man said thank God because he was very afraid of embarrassing himself. Leah said that Dillion was simply inimitable. Survival was very difficult for her. At that time, the girl sat down at the table. She put her head in her hands and closed her eyes. He certainly did whatever she wanted him to do, but... And the girl saw the young man carelessly break the most expensive plate. When he was sweeping the house, he accidentally broke the broom holder. Carelessly, he tore the pillow in half. The young man had a lot of strength. The girl was discouraged. If she kept going on like this, he was going to tear the whole house down. Something had to be done. At that moment, Dillion walked up to Leah. His hands were hidden behind his back. The girl looked at him tiredly. Had he really done something wrong again this time? Her look was sad and tired. Leah said she heard some rumbling, and she asked if the young man was okay, said he was just coming up to her about it. The girl asked if he'd hurt himself, and asked to see his hand. At this moment, the young man took out his hand from behind his back and said that he had slightly miscalculated his strength. There was a shard of on his hand. The girl looked carefully at his hand. She said that the most important thing was that he hadn't hurt himself. Leah said that glass is very dangerous. Usually glass is very easy to hurt if you squeeze it in your hand. Leah said the young man not to stand here but to go and rest, but the young man insisted that he would clean up the place. But Lilia was against it, and she grabbed the young man's hand. At that moment, Dillion quickly jerked his hand away. The girl didn't realize if she had hit him very hard. The young man said that the girl's hands were very hot. Leah told him not to touch the glass because he might hurt himself. The young man was outraged. After all, she too had taken the glass with her bare hands, and she herself as well as he might hurt herself. Why does she protect him so much from injury? Leah said it was completely different. But what the difference was, the young man didn't understand. Leah told the young man that his hands, unlike hers, were very soft. But at that moment she quickly stopped talking. She wanted to say that his hands were very soft and gentle. And at that moment, the girl turned her attention to the young man's hands. His hands were completely covered with scars. After a moment's thought, Leah said his hands were very valuable. She wondered why he had so many scars, where those scars came from. Said if he was really that worried about her, she'd ask him to fetch a broom. If he did, he wouldn't have to touch the glass with his bare hands. The young man understood the request and quickly went to get the broom. Leah sighed heavily at that moment, and her bird was sitting next to her. She said that this guy's hands were clearly not growing out of the right place. Leah admitted that she was very, very tired. At that moment, a brilliant idea came to mind. She suggested trying to distract the guy with something. But what? And Naden wondered. After a little thought, she said that the young man had been pelting them with questions since the evening before. Or maybe I could throw him a couple of books to read. Leah got excited. It was a wonderful idea. If the young man started reading, he would do less housework. It would be good for both her and him. Right. And there was already a sheaf of various books on the table. Leah could barely carry them. The books weren't that light. She sighed and wiped the sweat on her forehead. At that moment, a young man came into the room after the girl. He was also holding a whole bunch of books. He asked why they needed the books. Leah asked him if he wasn't interested. She's not good at teaching, so the books will make a better teacher. Sama told her around her neck that today read as many books as you can and don't bother Leah. The young man asked the owl to shut its mouth. Sama asked how one could be so uncouth. She said the young man was very annoying, and the girl realized that the two were perfect for each other. And Leah decided that while they were arguing, she would go and clean up. After a while, when the girl looked into the room, she saw that the guy was reading a book. I can't believe it. They had succeeded in distracting him a little. The girl thought it was necessary to do so at once. She quietly backed out of the room. I quickly closed the door behind me, and she was very happy. She was finally alone. She went in to see her flowers, which she loved to grow. It was time to clear up the pile of work that had accumulated. The girl stretched quickly, and now it was okay to rest. She was happy at this moment. No one was bothering her. No one was helping her or doing different things around the house. At that moment, Lilia saw butterflies in front of her. She greeted them and said that she had not seen them for a long time. She asked if it had snowed and they were still having fun. She gently touched the butterflies with her finger. At that moment, Leah heard the owl's formidable voice. Had the girl already adjusted? Line said she's been practicing for a year. That's why she's good at something. At that moment, she flew closer to the girl herself. Without the holy power, an ordinary person wouldn't see these butterflies, so she was very surprised when the owl told her about them. There is also a way to let ordinary people see them. Those golden-colored butterflies were just unreal. But at this time, it is not an illusion either. These creatures embody themselves stream in life. They can be found everywhere where there is life. The first thing she learnt from Naden after she escaped from the temple was that using large amounts of holy power, you can see these butterflies. It was said that she had more holy power than the others, and the girl asked if the others could see the butterflies too. It's just that you can always see them. It's the first time she's ever been through something like this, and if there's a benefit to learning. The girl, this knowledge helped in cultivating medicinal herbs, but is it necessary to practice every day? Sama said that in any case, basic skills are essential. If the girl learns to use the holy power with ease, it might save her in a dangerous situation in the future. Although it would be good if these situations never occurred. But you can't predict that. Even if they're in danger now, what the girl means is that now they're living with millions, and he's the main danger to them. Thinking a little, the girl remembered. Soon his curse would be hungry again. Leah was amazed. He'd eaten so much today, she'd fed him so much already. And at that moment, the girl remembered the episode when she had first found him, and that time when he lay dying. She felt very sorry for him. She said it doesn't take him long to get hungry. Lee, I thought maybe I'd give him a chance to starve. And I asked myself, if a girl was hungry and there was meat in front of you, would she be able to resist? Or told her not to worry. She thought like last time the cursed power wouldn't manifest. He should have enough life force of one beast. But if the situation didn't escalate, Leah knew that all too well. In the book, Dillion's curse didn't often break out either. After all, he was strong in spirit. He protected what was his and was so powerful that he could contain the powers of the curse himself. That's why it didn't come out. Though the girl doesn't know if he can contain the curse now that he's lost his memory. She remembered who made him lose it. It made her a little sad. Sama said it would be a good idea to send it off before it breaks loose. Well, now the weather was not on their side. There was a blizzard outside and it was snowing. Lilia looked outside and became a little sad. That's how long they have to wait before they can get rid of this guy. I thought that with the books he would quieten down a bit, but at that moment, the young man ran up to Leah and showed her the book. He asked to see the book because it was a picture of the Loheim Empire. The Loheim Empire is a sacred state. Lee sat down next to the young man on the armchair and looked at the book too. The story of the founding of this empire goes that there was one god on earth, Ovelos, who created the world and the empire. This is a very ancient empire with a rich history. The capital is home to the great temple which serves Ovelos. There are also other temples scattered throughout the empire, which are named in honor of the angels, the faithful henchmen of Ovelos. Since it is a holy state, the influence of the temple in it is great, but it does not interfere in political affairs, since they serve only God. Because of this, the imperial power is stable. The current patriarch has been running the temple for 200 years, so the position of the imperial family is also stable. Could that mean the emperor has absolute power? No. There is another family that could rival the emperor. At this moment, Lilia raised her index finger upwards. She said that it was Duke Sinese's family. Their mouths were said to have originated back when the empire was founded, so their stories are even older than even the imperial family. The imperial family has changed several times in the last 1,000 years, and it has remained that way. In fact, they are as old as the empire itself. Well, since they have so much power, wouldn't the imperial family seek to limit them? That was absolutely right. Leah said that no one had ever managed to do that before, so as a result they decided to coexist with them. The young man wondered why they had done that. That's because the emperor was always the one chosen by the Senyas, and they never betrayed the imperial family, so they couldn't betray them either. Moreover, he is the current heir to the Sinase family, Dillion, and this young man is very dangerous, so the imperial family doesn't want enmity. The young man thought for a moment. He had no idea what Leah was telling him about him now. In fact, the Sinai family isn't really interested in politics either, except for the fact that they get to choose the emperor. They think she's boring and dull. That's what Dillion said. He didn't care about anything that didn't concern him directly. And the girl asked the young man if he understood everything. The young man thanked Leah. He said he understood everything. After a little thought, he said he had one question. Leah listened to him intently. The young man didn't understand something. At this time, it was as if time began to fly before my eyes along with the documents. Leah said stop. She couldn't take it anymore, and she quickly left the room. She just ran away from this room. She went in search of freedom. She herself said that the young man had already tormented her. She asked the young man to ask her if he needed any answer. She had seen a lot in her life, so she would be able to answer some questions. This moment, the young man quickly slammed the book shut and said, well, now he had all questions of his own and asked only the owl. At that moment, the owl made a very upset face. She realized that all his questions were going to come at her now. But she really wanted to help Leah. After spending the day with Dillion, Owl was exhausted. She told Leah she was going to sleep. Leah felt sorry for her bird. After all, she had been suffering with him all day. Leah carried freshly washed laundry. As soon as the girl entered the room, the young man immediately asked her a question: what kind of person he had been in the past. Leah was astonished. Was the young man completely ignorant of fatigue? The young man asked what was his character. What was his rank? What did he do? He wanted to know everything about himself. At that moment, Leah laughed. He also wondered if he had a family. At that moment, Leah froze. She shifted her gaze to the young man. It was very strange for her to hear him ask such questions. At that moment, the young man stood by the wall and looked into the distance. He looked out the window at the snow that was slowly falling to the ground, and the girl said that of course he had a family, and they must be desperately looking for him now. Dillion asked if she really thought so. Aaliyah was quite sure of it. After all, everyone close to this young man swore allegiance to him. They just couldn't say anything against him. As soon as it stopped snowing, they would do everything they could to find him and bring him back. And at this point, it can be a problem for laziness. The girl asked him not to worry about it. He would definitely meet his family again. At this moment, the young man looked sadly at Hilia. He could see her supporting him, and he was grateful to her. Suddenly, the young man asked if it was true. The girl froze. What did he want to tell her now? And the young man slowly began to approach Leah. The young man quickly walked over to the chair and sat down in it. Lilia also sat not far from him in the chair. There was a silent pause. Leah looked at Dillion in surprise. It was clear that something was troubling him. He looked very sad and tired. Could it be? Is it really true? What he means by that? I wonder if Lily got caught after all. I wonder if he's figured it out. How much had she lied already? At what point did she start to deceive him? But it seemed to her that the memories hadn't come back to him after all. The girl was pleased. The important thing was that he'd kept her alive, even though he knew she was hiding something. The look on his face made me wonder why they weren't friends. I thought there must have been some reason, and there are circumstances when it's hard to tell the truth. Leah looked at the young man carefully. The young man was going to wait until she told him herself, but he was tired of waiting endlessly, and the young man asked her to tell him the truth at last. Leah lowered her gaze to the floor, and the young man asked her once more what she was hiding from him. He could feel it. Dillion was still being polite to her. Is it still the same man who doesn't have an ounce of sympathy? Even if he loses his memory, his nature won't change. Was she wrong about this guy? At that moment, the young man stood up and apologized. He could not tell her. It'll be dangerous if he reveals it. Who it would be dangerous for? The young man said it would be dangerous for both of them. It wasn't a lie. Lee was already imagining that she would be executed, and Dillion's blood pressure would rise and he might pass out. By the time the young man's memories return, she will have already left the Empire. So for now, we just have to get through this. There's no other way. Leah said he'll know everything when the time comes. So can they just let this conversation go for now? At this point, Dillion, what are you thinking about? Leah said she couldn't put him in such a difficult position, so the young man asked if she could tell him what it was. The young man felt somehow different from the video this. Leah said she would tell him. She was going to tell him about the curse anyway. You're okay. At this point, Leah asked the young man to undress first. Dillion was very surprised because of the smile. He once again questioned the girl what she had just told him. Why would he need to get naked now? At this moment, the young man crossed his arms across his chest. He asked to tell him so much and his tattoos, and she offers to undress him. How should he react to that? The young man took his time undressing. At that, it seemed to him that Leah's eyes were very devious at this moment. The girl was dumbfounded, but he had asked her to tell him about the tattoo. But the boy didn't ask me to undress him. Lee, I felt kind of stupid in this situation. Who he thinks she is. It's not at all what he thinks it is. Leah tried to explain to Dillion that she wasn't interested in his body. She suggested that he calm down. The girl knew that there would be no benefit to her if she quarreled with him. I decided to be blunt. She quickly jumped up from her chair and blinked that he was cursed. And the root of this curse is in his chest, or rather in his heart. The young man continued to sit with his hands crossed over his chest. She thought he wouldn't believe her if she told him that, which was why she had asked him to strip. It was absolutely not out of any personal interest in his kid or bad intentions. Dillion had thought the tattoo was a strange hobby. Now the young man wondered even more. There was much to him now and incomprehensible. Leah stood looking at him angrily. She said there was something else she wanted to show him. She asked him to come over to her for a while. At that time, some kind of glow began to emanate from the young man. The girl's face was flooded with light. She gave a quick ouch and touched Dillion's chest with her finger. She gripped hard at the collar of his shirt. At that moment, the young man took hold of Leah's waist. They looked at each other, eye to eye. At that moment, buttons from the young man's shirt began to fly off onto the floor. The girl looked into the guy's eyes and he looked into her big eyes. This went on for several seconds. At that time, Leah stretched out her shirt and exposed Dillion's pumped-up body. He was beautiful. Leah continued to look with her eyes into the young man's eyes. At this point, they pulled away in different directions. The girl fell to the floor and covered her eyes with her hands. What can I do? He's going to get really angry now. She really did it by accident. He saw that she almost fell and grabbed his shirt. At that moment, his shirt fell open, revealing a beautiful, pumped-up body. Dillion pulled away from the girl as well. He exhaled a sigh of relief. At this moment, Leah and Dillion found themselves sitting on the floor. At that moment, the young man laughed loudly. Leah didn't expect this from him. Is he really laughing? Has he gone mad with anger already? Now with this kind of thing, she has to take responsibility. I didn't understand what kind of responsibility she had to take. Dillion said she should think about it. The girl's making such a mess now and pretending she doesn't know anything. What kind of mess is he talking about? If anyone heard that, they'd misunderstand. Why did the girl throw herself at him so well wrong? Had she lost interest in him just once? At that time, Leah asked him to change immediately, and the girl quickly started pushing him out of the room. She had to ask the girl not to push. After all, she might tear his clothes again. Pushing him to a safe distance, she asked him to stand there. The girl said he regularly loses control. At that moment, the thorns begin to gradually grow, starting from the heart, along the neck to the cheeks, and the girl pointed her finger at her neck. At this point, the young boy asked what happens then when it gets out of control. The girl said that then this creature you suck all the life force of the living beings around you. Dillion looked carefully at the line. Did she really know that much about it? Does she really have it in front of her? Leah very interested in the curse. She knew it all at once as soon as she saw it. She couldn't tell him that he was out of control in front of her, because it would be hard for him to remember how she'd stunned him. All understood and walked over to the mirror. Lee, I realized that this information was likely to shock the young man. He doesn't remember anything. You were also very surprised to learn this information about your body. And until the curse takes as many lives as it wants, it will not rest. It would be nice if it didn't just take the lives of wild animals or trees. And at that moment, Lilia asked, had there really been one like this before? Dillion you to this place. The girl said it was a greenhouse where medicinal herbs are grown. At that moment, Leah picked up a potted flower, handed it to the guy, and said she was giving it to him. Dillion has lost his memory and can't control the curse, which means he doesn't know when it will go off. I was told this flower is called a white flower, so now a young man definitely needs this flower, but few call it by that name. There is a better known name. Dillian looked at Leah carefully, and the girl held out to him a pot with a beautiful white flower. Popular. The name of this flower is a curse detector. It's one of those plants called white blossom. It's one of those plants that is sensitive to cursing. This flower is pure white. When it feels the curse, it starts to turn black. That's why he is. It was very difficult for the girl to raise him. She wanted to sell it for a high price, and the girl thought that first and foremost she must stay alive. The girl handed it to Dillian. She said that if the flower became even slightly cloudy, he should tell her immediately. The young man understood. Leah wondered how many more flowers to put in his room. One would need to be placed next to his bed. At that moment, Dillian walked up to the girl and leaned into her hair. He asked her if she wore perfume. At that moment, the girl thought about it, but as soon as she heard his words, quickly I turned around and once again questioned what he had just said. The young man's face was very close to her, and she looked at his eyes carefully, then slowly shifted her gaze to his lips. Dillian asked again if she was wearing perfume. His feet were very close to hers. The girl did not understand why he came so close to her. After a little thought, she said she didn't wear perfume. She quickly moved a little further away from him. The young man thought it was her scent. She has a very pleasant odor. The young man moved closer, still close to the girl's cheek. He sniffed again. Dillian had said that when he was near her it smelled very nice. Leah quickly pulled away from him. She wondered if he could smell the scent of the flowers in the greenhouse. But the young man said no, it's something else. At that moment, the young man held out his hand. He took a strand of Leah's hair in his hand and looked at it. He said that when he was near her it was very peaceful. At that moment, the girl turned her attention to the flower. It was especially bright today. Not just bright, but especially bright. And the young man went on to tell me that when he smelled that odor, it was already dark outside. There was a candle on the table in the room. There was a sheet of paper and a quill beside it. At that moment, the young man let go a strand of the girl's hair. Lilia turned around and looked at him carefully. The time was already late, and she needs to make dinner right away, because Dillian might get hungry. The young man stood at that moment and looked at the girl carefully. He realized that she had just found an excuse to escape. At that moment, Leah quickly ran out of the room and headed for the kitchen. Leah walked to her room. The room was gloomy and dark. She quickly fell onto the bed and closed her eyes. As always, she sat next to her and dozed. Well, at that moment, the owl heard something. She quickly opened her eyes and frowned her eyebrows. Owl saw the young man enter Leah's room. How dare he come in here? The young man said he came here because he had something to think about. The bird was surprised. He entered the sleeping girl's room only because something interested him. The young man asked if the owl would tell him what secret the girl was hiding. She sat silent and only looked at him. Dillian had expected her to behave like that. He looked once more at the sleeping girl. What was she hiding, this woman? After all, she had said that if the truth was revealed, they would both be in danger. What is this? Could it be his past identity? And Dillian wondered if he'd ever lost his temper in front of a lie. Had he almost hurt her in that moment? Self had said all the right things, but Leah had dealt with it. That cleared up a lot of things for the young man. But it was a lie. And he remembered the girl's words that she knew a great deal about it. Yes, she was very interested in the curse, and she knew it as soon as she saw his tattoo. She knows curses better than anyone else because she's seen it with her own eyes. But why she kept it from him? Could it have something to do with her secrets? Or maybe it has something to do with my missing memories. If he was strong enough to harm those around him, there's a high probability he lost his memory as a side effect. Believed. Why then was the young man so uncomfortable? And the young man turned to the bird again. He said that his heart races as soon as he looks at her, and the thought of Leah makes him dizzy and in pain. Does Naden know this is happening to him? Sama was wise, and she quickly closed her mouth. She said it was nothing but love. Dillian was surprised. Could it really be love? What on earth was it? He had never felt this feeling before. Rapid heartbeat, dizziness, difficulty breathing. These are typical symptoms of a man in love. Dan's seen it in novels. Dillian was really annoyed by this. Once again, the young man didn't realize what scent filled the room, and what it was that he was feeling inside. The young man was just confused. What kind of love is that? Dillian turned round abruptly and started to walk away. He said that even such nonsense was usually said carefully. Owl was discouraged. Could it really be nonsense? Suddenly, the young man turned round and called the owl Tolstoy. Why doesn't she get off the girl? She could just crush her. And the young man quickly shooed the owl away from the girl. He left and closed the door behind him. The owl only hummed. She'd got it right. There was definitely love between these two, and the young man felt just somehow happy. That can't be. Leah was already awake and making breakfast. She had not heard what had happened during the night, nor did she hear a single word of the conversation that had taken place between herself and the boy. Dillian was sitting in the kitchen, watching Leah's every move. At this time, the young man said that the girl had told him that she didn't use perfume. Leah really didn't see the point of using them. Leah muttered that the scent was most likely from the greenhouse. Why had the scent been lingering since yesterday? And why he kept looking at her like that? She was afraid he remembered something about her. The girl tried to avert her gaze. Well, that was very hard to do. At that moment, something caught the girl's eye. She turned her attention to the white-flowered flower. He stood on the window and was still. The girl was very worried because the bird had said that the young man might lose his temper again at any moment. Leah was very worried. Her head was spinning. She prayed to God that he would stop paying attention to her. It was very snowy outside. There were already snowdrifts around the house with it. At that moment, someone knocked hard on the door. The girl turned round quickly. She wasn't expecting visitors. She wondered who had come to see them. The door continued to be banged on. Leah turned and asked who was banging on the door like that in the morning. The young man stood up quickly and held out his hand. He headed for the door. Or I didn't understand why he was doing that. The young man thought it was strange to come to her house in this weather. The heavy snowfall made it difficult to move around, and the house is next to a forest. Who could have got here? And why would they come here? Leah thought it might carry some danger. She quickly picked up the frying pan and slid it behind her shoulder. She was prepared. At this time, Dillion turned his attention to what the girl was doing. The young man reached out his hand to the doorknob and pulled on it. There was some snow monster standing outside and it was screaming loudly. Everyone was shocked, both the owl and Lily. Dillion alone was calm and cool. At this moment, the snow beast fell to the floor. No one understood who it was or what it was. Leah thought it was a monster. She warned the boy that it could be dangerous. She asked him not to get too close. Dillion crouched down beside the snowball and asked everyone to calm down. After all, it's not a monster, it's a human being. Leah was surprised. Could it really be this man? She continued to hold the pan on her shoulder. Sama sat on Leah's head and covered her eyes with her wings. At that moment, the snow scattered, and someone spoke Leah's name. Could it really have been Claude? When the young man was cleared of snow and warmed up, next to drink hot tea, the club decided that he would now live. He felt happy holding a hot cup of tea in his hands. Line asked what he was thinking walking so far in this weather. The girl brought him another plaid. He said he had one thing to do. Claude asked if Leah had any heavenly wild ginseng. Yes, I said she should. Kvoth asked the girl to sell him the plant. He was willing to pay 1.5 times the market price for it. But the girl asked him to pay twice the market price. Claude agreed. So be it. He'll pay twice as much. And he showed Leah 2 fingers. The girl was leaving this plant for a rainy day, but it seemed that now Claude had a really serious case, and the girl was ready to help him. Suddenly it seemed to the water that the owl had spoken, or he had heard it. How an owl can talk. At that moment, Leah walked up to Dillion. She asked him to stop looking at Claude like that. He just drilled him with his gaze. Dillion couldn't believe she'd let a stranger go into her house no matter how much they worked together. It was very reckless. The girl wondered if he was also the one grumbling. He himself is an outside man to her, but apparently he doesn't think so. Leah asked, did he really need to leave him to die of frostbite? Dillion was being cruel at this point. That it was exactly what she should have done. The frog seems to have forgotten that he was once a tadpole, too. Then he should have been left to freeze to death, or to die of severe bleeding. The girl had no choice but to quickly escort Claude out. Leah told Claude, as soon as he warms up, he should follow her. She will prepare the plant right away. Claude was surprised. He didn't expect Leah to want him out so quickly. Suddenly, something caught Claude's attention, and he shouted out, "Wow!" Leah turned around quickly. The young man stood and pointed his finger at the flower she had given to Dillion. Claude was stunned. It was a white flower, and he asked the girl to sell it to him. The club shouted that it was willing to pay twice or even 3 times as much, but the girl wouldn't agree. Claude was willing to pay 4 times as much. The girl wasn't willing to sell this flower even if he could pay 10 times as much. The flower is not for sale. At that moment, the fruit wept. He was asking her to sell a flower. While this flower was very important to Leah herself, it would have to save a life. At that moment, Dillion folded his arms across his chest. He asked Claude to stop bothering Miss Leah. Claude didn't expect that from a man who was in Leah's house. Dillion said the flower was his, so the young man didn't have to worry about it. Claude didn't believe it. He asked Leah if it was true. Leah said it was true, and she gave this flower to Dillion. Claude couldn't believe it. Leah asked to stop this mayhem and get over to her faster. Walking into the greenhouse, Claude began to glow with happiness. He asked just to look at those herbs. It was the first time he had ever seen someone grow herbs so well. He asked Leah how she did it. The girl said it was a secret. She just used her power, that's how they grew well. Claude asked Leah if she was sure of the man's identity. Claude asked if he wasn't dangerous. Leah wondered why he suspected him. Or did Wilhelm appear to be the culprit? Claude was dumbfounded. How could she know that? He hadn't told her about it. How did she know? Didn't know if he was a criminal or not, but the reward is huge. If the girl wants to ask how much the reward is. But Leah didn't hear those words anymore. She was stunned. Was he really wanted? They also want a huge amount of money for him. Dollar signs appeared in Leah's eyes. She asked if it was true. He confirmed it. Well, what was the guy's impression of me, if he had all that money? Claude started to tell the story. It was said to be a man with black hair, red eyes, and a black tattoo on his neck. That was right. From the description, it was Dillian. Everything was too perfect to be a mere coincidence. He's got a tattoo, and the eyes are unusual. The club started fantasizing. He asked if this guy was really okay. This man hurt Dillian. He was looking for him because he couldn't kill him right away. And she saved him. Isn't this a chance for her now? A perfect opportunity to get rid of Dillian. And if she used this reward to get away, even Dillian wouldn't be able to find her. But Dillian is very strong. Leah needs to come to her senses. Strong and perfect is Duke Sinais, not Dillian, who has lost his memory. And the girl turned to Claude. She asked him not to tell anyone or anything. She asked the young man to promise her that he had not seen the guy. Claude was indignant. What if this man is dangerous? He asked Leah if he had threatened her. The girl asked Claude to calm down. It wasn't like that at all. She knew what he was worried about, but Dillian. She asked Claude if he'd ever seen her bring strange people home. It's her house, and it's up to her to decide what she wants to do. Claude said all the right things, but he warned her just in case. Lee, I said that this man is a very miserable man now. A very serious thing had happened to him, and he had lost his memory. Once more, the girl asked Claude to pretend he hadn't seen him. Leah asked Claude very nicely, and Claude agreed to do it. He realized that he hadn't seen anything today, but in return he asked Leah to do him one favor. It was just a robbery. Claude thanked the line. He promised to keep his promise. In return, he got a whole backpack of the necessary plant for free. Leah waved her goodbye at Shirokova and asked her to be careful. The girl exhaled a sigh of relief. She was very tired today. She went outside and wanted to take a little walk. At that moment, she saw Dillian standing not far away. The girl said it was not good to eavesdrop. While the young man stood silent, he felt no guilt for listening. Dillian said he was watching him in case he did something weird. Why he's looking at her like that? At this point, the young man quickly averted his gaze. He asked the girl why she had hidden it. The girl expected him to hear all this, but she didn't think he'd ask so directly. Dillian said he should ask questions at once to satisfy his curiosity. And first, the girl suggested that we go into the house. After all, it was very cold outside today. Dillian was sure the girl would sell it right away. Leah was surprised. Did he really think that much of her? She had a conscience too. Of course, that doesn't mean she didn't have such thoughts, but the young man said everything because she could get rid of him at any time. It was obvious. How would she sell someone she had lived with for such a short time? Because those could be the people who hurt Dillian. There was a reason she found him wounded and dying. She did not know him as she did before she lost her memory. But the present young man is but a small citizen. If he dies, even if he turned out to be a villain, Leah didn't want him to suffer because of her. She didn't want the original to be realized. She didn't want to be involved in any of this. Either told her not to worry. She squeezed the spatula hard in her hand. She said he wouldn't get caught if he continued to stay here. But if Dillian's existence is discovered, Leah will definitely have a hard time. When the snow stops, we'll have to find a way to get out undetected. Dillian asked Leah if she's afraid to go on such ventures. After all, he himself realized that he could have been a bad person. Why she trusts him and keeps him close to her. Leah thought for a moment. And if she said she wasn't scared, she'd be lying. Leah said it didn't matter to her at all what kind of person he was in the past. The Dillian she knows now is a very good man, so it's all right. And the girl looked straight into the young man's eyes with a smile. Dillian, who had lost his memory, was a perfectly normal man. And what's more, he wasn't as scary as the rumors of the day had made him out to be. At least now she didn't have to worry about him killing her. Leah said, if a young man does something bad to her. The young man understood, even if the girl didn't say it out loud. Leah asked the young man to go first, and she wanted to see the greenhouse. The young man stood and looked at this girl intently. She was different. She was amazing. There were many different vials of medication in her house. She also had a greenhouse where she grew a variety of plants. No accusations. The young man knew that it was very difficult for this girl to be with him, so if she had the chance, she would ask him mercilessly. If she'd given Claude all the information about him. And he remembered Claude's words. He knew he had a tattoo, and the man's eyes were unusual. Was there really nothing wrong with this guy? And the young man wondered if he could kill her and Claude. But he just can't do it, he can't kill her. And he remembered how desperately the girl had asked Claude to pretend he didn't know anything, to keep repeating that this young man was not at all the man she imagined him to be. The girl knew that Dillian was a good man. It's just that the people who are looking for him and are willing to pay a large sum of money, they are the ones who harmed him. Dillian, who I know now, is a good man, so it's okay. The young man once again thought that this girl was very strange, so he plucked one of the petals of a flower that was growing in the greenhouse, except already starting to lie and that urge to hide something. Dillian couldn't believe her words anymore. The girl is very sweet but full of contradictions, and strangely he wants to believe her. What's the point of helping him at the risk of your own life? And the young man clenched his fist with force. Why was Lilia lying to him? Suddenly someone turned to sulfur Dillian. It was Leah. She asked why he was still here. The girl looked at the young man with happy eyes. Could it be that he still walks around looking at flowers? Alina approached one of the flowers and asked the young man if he knew what kind of flower it was. They were purple hyacinths, the girl said, which, according to the language of flowers, means abiding love. The young man asked if that was possible. Lily thought for a moment. I said she was one of those people who thought that nothing in the world was permanent. Also, the girl said that it is very romantic, therefore she really wants to believe that it is possible. The girl once more told the young man if he knew, and she plucked one of the flowers. The hyacinth, before it was the flower of love, was the flower of victory, because it froze on the day that the founding king, Lysandro Loheim, got rid of his political enemies and ascended to the throne. So they've been calling it the victory flower ever since, although it became famous for being the exact flower that the king gave to his beloved when he proposed. At this point, Dillion took his hand, though it was quite an impulsive statement. It wasn't a lie. When he was near her and something incredible happened to him, Leah said she thought it would be difficult, and the only person he can rely on is Leah. The girl said she couldn't be with him forever. Well, you can live a normal life. The man didn't say a word but somehow mentally told her all this, or maybe she had just read his mind. The young man looked carefully at Leah. He said he didn't know who his family was, where his house was. He knows absolutely none of this. He could walk out of here and get caught by bad people. Leah wondered. She asked him to stop. She's got it all figured out. It's her fault he lost his memory, so she couldn't say anything to him. The young man laughed merrily. His smile was so dazzling that it just blinded her, and so they clutched at each other's little fingers. Let me make a promise to each other. Or I made a promise. Unfortunately, promises are made to be broken. Until now, the young man did not realize that a promise made with a complacent heart would become slavery. And so Claude had already arrived at the appointed place. He brought the plants I gave him, Leah. The customers were happy that everything was top-notch this time, too. Leah was just something. She grew herbs very beautifully, but at this point one of the men said it didn't look like the herb they had asked for. Claude said I gave it to Leah because he barely survived the blizzard. But she gave it to him in silence, but he couldn't have said anything. I mean, he promised the girl. The man asked what had happened to Leah. Claude was silent. He only mentally thought of her. After that, he hugged the backpack of herbs and carried it into the distance. Suddenly, Claude was shouted at. Dillion stood in front of him. He asked the young man to bring him information about the man with red eyes he had told Leah about. Claude was surprised. Why should he listen to him? Dillion looked at the young man with a stern look. Claude said there was a cost to the inquiry. He never said there would be. At that moment, the young man held out some sort of pendant to him. He looked at her carefully and covered his eyes. The young man asked if it was enough. It wasn't enough. The club said the guy who's the reason they're giving the bounty. There's like one or two of them, the one with the red eyes. And the man started shaking him by his shirt. Someone said he didn't know anything. These were all the memories that visited Claude. Suddenly, the people who bought plants from him asked what was wrong with him. They told him that there were many rumors. Some said he was a vicious killer. Some claimed he was a slave who ran away after beating up some noblemen. Claude expected it to be like that. He hadn't heard a single piece of useful information. The young man was a little upset. He was very sure that this man was very dangerous. That he was eavesdropping was suspicious. Is it right to pretend not to know anything, as I asked him Leah? Though the relationship between them seemed deep, and he imagined the young man gently embracing Leah. But it didn't really happen. But if it was for Leah's sake, the Lord would have to reveal it. And he remembered again how Leah had asked him to pretend he hadn't seen anything. It was the first time he'd ever seen Leah like this. He slammed his fist into his forehead again. He said he didn't know anything. After that, he quickly placed a glass of beer on the table. He lowered his head and mouthed Leah's name. The men who bought plants from Claude asked what had happened to him. She said that Leah had someone she liked, and that pissed Claude off. Shoppers were stunned too. What kind of guy is that? He must be very handsome. I can't believe I like him too. Someone asked if this guy was nice or not. One of the guys said that Lena only likes girls who are pretty. The clown said he gave such an expensive thing for nothing. He thought he had a lot of money. This thing even looked expensive at first glance. Claude didn't know anything else. He only knew one thing. Their Lily must be in luxury. Everyone was fine with it. Of course, the girl deserved more. And if not, they were ready to go swearing. Suddenly, someone called out to Claude. At that moment, a man in a black cloak approached Claude. He asked him what he had and where he got it. Claude quickly clutched in his hand the thing the Dillion had given him. It was still winter outside. All the trees were covered with snow. Snow-white hares were running along the roads. Leah was walking down the street and looking carefully at everything around her. On this day, Leah decided to go hunting. She was accompanied as always by her guardian angel, Nadin the owl. The owl said that everything was fine and that she was breathless. Leah was very worried that she hadn't hunted for so long, but everything went well. The girl thought there would be enough food to last until spring, but it turned out quite wrong, because they had another eater in the house. Leah never thought this guy would be such a glutton, but he liked everything. Leah's cooking was delicious. We ran out of food pretty quickly, and now Leah was holding a snow-white hare in her hand. Suddenly, the girl heard someone's words. It was Dillion coming towards her. He could certainly guess that she was quite capable, but he didn't think he'd do so well, and the young man held out his hand to Leah. He asked her to give the hair to her. The owl sat on her shoulder and cheered. Naturally, her Leah's skills were the best, for she had taught her everything. The girl quickly handed the hair to the boy, and he quickly put it in the bag. Now it was necessary to walk carefully, but suddenly on Leah, her foot fell somewhere under the snow. The girl stopped and only oohed. She quickly looked down at her leg. At that moment, the young man extended his hand to Leah and asked her to hold on to him. The girl was very surprised. At that moment, he reached out his hand and took the girl by the arm. Dillion helped Leah out and put his arm around her shoulder. Our girl felt very warm and cozy from his touch. Turned to Sir Dillion. She wanted to say something to him. It turned out that he hadn't let go of her hand. He must have been thinking and hadn't even noticed that he was still holding her hand. The girl reminded him that it was time to let go of her hand. Dillion suggested that Leah just go hold hands. After all, he was sure the girl might fall again, and so he wanted to back her up. But the girl seemed to take offense. Is she really that clumsy? But at that moment, her foot fell through the snow again. Dillion was able to pick up the girl again and hugged her with both arms. Leah also clung to him at that moment. At that moment, they stood still for a second. It was as if they were enchanted by each other. The young man asked if he had caught her again, and he was now ready to hold her. Leah agreed, and the owl was very jealous of the girl for the young man and called him names. At this moment, the owl was sitting on Leah's head. These words offended the young man very much, and he asked the owl if she was really a guardian, if she spoke low words. The owl was outraged and said that she was Leah's guardian, not him. The young man exhaled annoyingly and looked at the girl carefully. If the guardian spirit is so unworthy that again. Leah was looking at the Dillion, and the Dillion was looking directly into the girl's eyes. At that moment, an owl was sitting on the girl's head and was looking angrily at the young man. She was beginning to dislike him. What's happening now? Leah questioned what the young man had just said about her guardian. She pretended not to hear. The young man said that her spirit guardian had no nobility if he spoke such low words. Leah was indignant. What kind of spirit is a guardian? And she quickly grabbed the owl in her hands. Naden's owl is just a spirit, she is not her guardian. At that moment, the young man turned to the Leah. He told the girl if she knew that the corners of her eyes quivered when she lied. Leah was dumbfounded. She quickly grabbed her face with her hand, as if she wanted to touch those corners of her eyes that were trembling at this moment. And what an attentive young man this young man is. Leah could just feel the corners of her eyes trembling. She quickly lowered her eyes and wished they would stop trembling faster. Well, nothing was helping. The owl asked how he could know that. At that moment, she was already sitting on the young man's head. A few seconds passed, and the twitching of the corners of my eyes stopped. I was pleased. Dillion said it was mentioned in the scriptures. Leah was surprised to hear about the scripture from the boy, and she remembered that it was among the books she had given him to read. Had the young man read it too? Dillion hated temples. A child from a prestigious Synese family should be perfect, but the Duke and Duchess of Synese are unable to accept that their child was born cursed. To the temple, for all their attempts to cure him were in vain. Although it wasn't described in detail, it was easy to see that something about the time was very painful for her hour. After this treatment, Dillion went to the temples, refused to be treated with divine power, and henceforth did not even come close. Hating the temple, he despised the priests, and of course the holy Ainu was treated in the same way. She was loved by just about everyone who ever met her. But Dillion wasn't the type. No matter how hard she tried, he wouldn't give in to her attraction. He was most likely the only character who hated Aina. But if Aina had managed to break the curse of a million, perhaps her ending would have been different. Although Dillion's life had been miserable too. You couldn't say he was ever happy. Even his face was always gloomy. After all, he suffered all his life because of his curse until he died. Or I'm thinking. At this point, the young man asked why she was looking at him like that. And I thought about the story of the Dillion. She quickly averted her eyes and said that she wasn't looking at him at all. She asked if he would keep it a secret. In fact, there was nothing of the sort in the scriptures. It was only his supposition, but she took it and confirmed it herself. Leah was stunned. Had he really got her now? If he kept her secret, what was she willing to do for him in return? And the girl asked if this was how his shamelessness was displayed. And the girl decided that she would give him both of the rabbit's hind legs for this favor. At that moment, Dillion laughed merrily. Well, that was good too. At that moment, the young man asked Leah if she was hungry, and he took food out of the bag. The girl was stunned when he managed to get it all out. The owl sat up and asked if he had brought something for her too, and everyone decided it was time for a snack. Leah began spreading a piece of cloth on the earth to make a snack table. At that moment, Dillion called out to the girl. She took her eyes off the tablecloth and looked at the young man. At that moment, he held out his hand to her. Gently, he stroked her face and moved very close. Their eyes met. The girl was embarrassed. The color flooded her face. At that moment, the young man quickly removed in his hand. And now already Leah took her hand to her face. Ours showed me a piece of something on her finger, and he told her there was something stuck to her face. The girl understood. The young man asked if she had left a piece of food on her face for a snack later. Leah looked embarrassed and quickly wiped around her mouth. She said of course not. The young man said her face was bright red now. What in the world was she imagining? But Leah wasn't thinking of anything. She just felt like this was the moment he was going to kiss her. But she couldn't tell him that, could she? The girl coughed and gave him the axe in her hand. She asked him to take it and hurry up and chop some firewood. She asked to work off her food. At this point, she started pushing her arm back to make him go faster. I found laughed and asked if their current concept was mistress and lumberjack. At that moment, the young man said that he had recently read in a book that Leigh's mind was spinning with scraps of phrases. Concept. The book? How many clever words he learnt from the books she gave him. The young man asked if she was curious. Leah said she wasn't at all. Dillion, of course, didn't believe it. He only smiled. And at that moment, the color flooded back into Leah's face. She remembered. That's right. She had given him Mamie Altan's book, hadn't she? And he had read it all in it. The girl tried to justify herself. She said it wasn't her book. It was her friend's book. But this time, the young man just laughed. The girl tried again to see that this book was not hers. The young man asked if the rabbit's hind legs she had promised him earlier would be for dinner tonight. Did he really mean it now? The color flooded back into her face. She was already as red as a tomato. At that moment, Dillion turned around and went to get firewood. Leah just kept shaking her fist at him and asking him not to joke around. At that moment, Leah listened. She heard a noise. The girl turned her head to find the source of the noise. The girl quickly looked at a tree that stood not far away. She sat in the tree and dozed quietly, but it didn't sound like an owl snoring. Did it? And the girl imagined that some monster had appeared in the forest. It's a huge lizard that climbs in the snow and makes that noise. This lizard approached the Dillion from the back. The young man quickly turned around and threw his axe. When he turned around, he saw a large lizard crawling across the snow. He didn't realize what it was at first, so he quickly threw his axe at it. Drops of blood flew into his face. He did it so fast that he didn't realize how it all happened. At that time, Leah came running up to him. She asked if he was okay. His face and said he was fine. You said he was fine. But what's that appeared, and he pointed at the lizard that was lying next to him. If it's some kind of monster. The boy asked if there were monsters in the forest. Leah looked down at the floor. She said that there are a lot of monsters in this forest. There are so many of them that they are destroying the ecosystem. But she didn't think they'd come here at all. You have to be a little more careful. The girl said it wasn't safe here now and they should go back right away. Lee. I was very glad that the young man was not hurt at all. He was lightning fast. It was good that she had given him an axe with him. The girl said it was necessary to go back now. It's getting cloudy. At this point, the young man said that he wanted to ask the lived here. That question puzzled Leah. She didn't expect him to ask it, and she couldn't find the words to answer him. She gathered the wood in her hands and slowly began to turn around. And in her head it went on. If there are monsters in this forest, why does she live here? After gathering my thoughts a little, I said it's very simple. The prices are lower because there is a black forest nearby. The young man asked again about the black forest. Or did I say that's right? This place is called the Black Forest. He can see for himself what a sorry state the forest is in. But even if it did seem dangerous, it was possible to live here. The only thing that bothered Leah was that the forest was slowly dying. No one knows why it's dying. Everyone just whispers that this forest is cursed. As the leaf began to die, the food chain collapsed and monsters began to breed. They became more and more numerous and began to devour the animals living in it. So the forest has become a den of monsters, but they don't come out of the forest. So you can walk on the edge of the forest freely until now. The young man realized that there was no guarantee that the monsters wouldn't come down to her house. Leah said that even if they did, nothing would happen. The girl said that the houses were protected on all sides by a barrier stone. The young man wondered where she got it. Although these stones are hard to find, her friend Mac got some for her, because she was very worried about her. And the girl said again that the book about the lady and the woodcutter was also this friend's. Dillion listened to the girl attentively. He asked where her friend was now. Leah said that she had been asked to move to the capital. She warned that it would take a month, so she should be back in about 2 weeks. She looked at the boy and wondered if he believed her words, and the girl said that everything was really good with her. And she's not afraid to live in this house. Leah said that her house was a real fortress with iron walls that hadn't been broken once in the last year, and the girl noted that the sun was already setting, and they needed to get back immediately. The girl and the young man held hands and walked slowly towards the house. An owl accompanied them. The young man walked on, a thought swirling in his head. After all, Leah may be deluded, but nothing in this world is perfect. Owl noticed that the young man was holding the girl's hand again. What was that nonsense? Why didn't I take my hand away? The girl said she couldn't fall anymore. Everything has its weaknesses. Suddenly the young man stopped. Leah wanted to address him, but he gestured that it was necessary to keep silent now. They saw that there was someone in front of the house. The boy and the girl quickly stopped nearby. They decided not to approach the house right away. Lee. I looked carefully at the girl who was standing in front of the house. She immediately realized that she was not from the village. The girl had long brown hair and a red cape. Suddenly they came closer and asked the girl who she was. The girl quickly turned around and looked at Leah and dumbfounded. How could this girl know, and this together? The girl said she saw the house when she just happened to be passing by. What a load of rubbish. Or did I say the villagers don't walk this road? Not to mention how dangerous the forest is. The girl's eyes lit up with a blue light at that moment. Leah watched the girl carefully. She realized that something might happen now. At that moment the girl with the stick came at the Dillion, and he cut her stick with a knife. The girl said it was funny and she didn't expect him to do that. The girl asked where the young man had put the sword and why he was carrying such a flimsy axe. The young man said, "Doesn't that mean she is not even worthy to bear her sword against her?" The young man was witty even in a situation like this. He seemed confident though. At this moment Leah was loading arrows into her bow, and she drew on her aunt and let loose an arrow. At that moment the red-haired girl slapped Leah's hand. She said that it was necessary to fight fairly. Leah quickly fell to the ground, and now it wasn't a girl in front of them. It was a bald young man with an eye patch. He said it was not good to attack sneakily. He was very happy and laughed. At that moment the young man tried to hit the girl with the club, but she courageously repelled the attack. She dodged the club masterfully. Too bad the bow was too far away from her, and she quickly grabbed the rock in her hands. Is it really fair to attack an unarmed man? At that moment Leah quickly threw a rock at the young man. The rock went straight to the man's head. At that moment the owl landed on the man's head and started scratching him with its claws. How dare he do that to Aaliyah? The man screamed. He didn't expect the owl itself to come at him. He turned round quickly. Leah watched the falling man carefully. She was just dumbfounded. She had never seen anything like this before. At that moment Dillion ran up to the girl. He told her if she was all right and offered his help. He quickly took her hand and helped her up. The girl who had come to their homes was lying on the ground. There was blood all around. Leah began to feel very sorry for her, and she covered her mouth with her hand. At that moment Dillion lifted the girl in his arms and carried her into the house. He looked sternly once more at the girl who had come to their house. At that time Leah said that someone was coming, and at that moment a shining arrow stabbed into the snow. It stabbed in and sparks flew out to the sides. Or maybe I didn't realize it had just happened. The young man said that the iron walls protecting the fortress were broken. That's when the owl flew up. It told Leah that the barrier stone was broken, and they would attack them soon. Well, who could have done it? How could it have happened? Leah didn't understand anything. It's them. They had come to catch the deed. And the girl realized at once that Claude had blabbed and had not kept his promise to her. At that moment, several more arrows flew in. Dillion tried to knock them down with his axe on the fly. Something had to be done, and as quickly as possible. Dillion had his back to Leah, and the girl only looked on with surprised eyes and oohed. Dillion said there are most likely 15 of them here. At this point, the young man commands, "On the count of 3, everyone goes back into the house, locking the door and not coming out until he authorizes it." Or I asked what he was going to do alone with 15 people. I mean, he doesn't even know how many there really are. At first glance, it looks like there are about 15 people, 17 to be exact. But that's quite a lot. The young man said so what, it was possible. Even a Dillion before he lost his memory would have a hard time dealing with 17 to 1. At this point, Lee grabbed the young man's arm. She said no, and there were too many of them. She asked the young man to leave. She called him by name. But the young man said that if 17 men came for one, did it not mean that he was so strong? And Lilia looked intently into his eyes. Dillion said it was okay and she could go inside. The young man said he didn't think he was going to lose. He was 100% sure of himself. The owl also beckoned for the lay to follow her, for it is better for the young man to fight alone, and they would only hinder him. But Leah disagreed. She looked at Dillion, and she hated to leave him here alone. At that moment, the girl let go of her hand. She only told Dillion that if he hurt himself. At this situation, too, Ours told me he couldn't be late for dinner that way, and now someone was coming up behind him with a sword. The fight was on. The young man only had time to shout to Leah not to worry, and the girl realized that it wasn't his voice anymore. The young man asked the monsters to come out faster. He picked up his sword. The young man said that if they did not come out themselves, he would come to them himself. At this point, the girl and herself quickly closed the door of the house. Leah could only hear loud screams and the sound of fighting. The girl sat in the house and was very worried that there was nothing she could do to help him now. At the same time, she herself sat on the window and watched the Dillion closely. Or I'd ask how he was doing. I'd tell her not to worry, but he was fine. But neither girl could work out in her head how they had broken the barrier. After all, it had never happened before. She herself had said that nothing was impossible if you wanted it. especially when you look at the way these men fight. They're well trained. Leah was stunned. If they're well trained, then they're even more dangerous. Owl said it was fine. She tried to distract the lay somehow and calm her down. The girl said that if this was all in the past, she wouldn't care at all. But now she was so worried that she couldn't take her eyes off the way Dillion fought. At that time, Lev cried out no. She saw with her own eyes how the arrow hit the young man. Dillion began to fall. At this time, he grabbed the arrow with his hand and quickly yanked it out of her. Leah thought he was falling. He didn't. Leah was stunned. Who yanks arrows out of themselves like that? She stood there, unable to just watch all of this. At that time, the girl said she must go. But the owl tried her best to stop her. She was telling her that it might take her burden away from the fight. Leah was 100% determined. If he's hurt, she can't just hide here. She herself had said that it was necessary then to get a weapon to begin with. The girl thought these male attackers were cowards. How could a bunch of them attack one? No matter how strong or he was, she couldn't leave him there alone. Thankfully, it didn't look like the arrow had gone in deep, but since there were many of them, they would try to catch it again when it opened up. She couldn't let Dillion get hurt anymore. So the girl decided to at least bring a kitchen knife with her. As soon as she entered the kitchen, something caught her attention. She saw something unusual that surprised her very much. She saw at that moment her white-flowered flower. At that moment, it was black in color. The girl walked over and tried to touch him with her hand. She took it in her hands and couldn't believe it. Could it be? At this time, the glass in the house shattered and flew straight at Leah. Dillion flew into the room. He was holding his head. He had probably already become a monster at this point. Illy stood and looked at him carefully. Something strange was happening to Dillion. He's a monster. It was bad. It was a special situation. A black energy followed the body. This energy was very familiar to Lee, a sensation she never wanted to experience again. The feeling of being cursed, and the girl was looking intently at everything that was going on. She saw what was there. His body was shaking all over. The girl saw that the ornamentation of the entire tattoo had already spread to almost the entire house. Leah didn't realize at this point either her to undertake. He screamed for mercy and also begged to be rescued. He climbed and reached for one of the flowers. At that time, Leah and the owl closed their eyes, and the Dillion disappeared at that time. When they opened their eyes, he wasn't in the house. There was complete silence. It was as if nothing existed in the world. At that moment, Leah and the owl went outside. It really scared them. There were ornaments everywhere, even in the snow. There was a Dillion sitting outside. Owl asked if that was the reason. What kind of arrow was it that had stuck him? The girl said it was too common to call it poisonous, and early on not lethal like last time to enhance the curse so much. In fact, it was sensitive to the health of its bearer. The girl turned her attention to the pattern on the young man's neck, said that even after it has been absorbed for 17 lifetimes, it has not shrunk in size. Rather, it's getting even bigger and wilder. Owl suggested stopping it now. Otherwise, it could have swallowed up this entire area. And she was the one who had to do it. Only she couldn't stop Leon now. The girl said that everything would be all right and started to move closer and closer to the young man. She knelt down in front of him. The girl was sure that Naden's shield would protect her, and she called her by our name. The girl said it was over. She said it was over and he should try to stop. The girl took his hand. But it seems that because of the increased curse, he can't hear her at all. It was at this time that Ply was approached by an owl. She asked her to use her divine power at once. After all, everyone could see how the young man was suffering right now. He couldn't handle it on his own. Or did I say how unlucky she was that she'd had to deal with his curse amplification twice? And at this moment, the girl attempted to use divine power. At that moment, Dillion forcefully squeezed the girl's hand with vigor. She looked carefully into his eyes. His eyes were tired. White moths flew around them. At that moment, the young man closed his eyes. At this moment, the young man collapsed onto the girl's shoulder exhaustedly. Even if he pulled the divine power out of her like this, the curse still wouldn't disappear. But divine power isn't rubber, and she can't keep pulling him out all the time. What if he attacks her later and says he'll kill her? But Leah wasn't ready to leave him. And then there was a glow of some kind. She saw that the patterns on the ground and the snow and around her began to fade, and she sat on earth hugging a Dillion and using her power. At that moment, she opened her eyes, looked around in surprise. She addressed him by name. The girl felt his body become very hot. She touched her hand to his forehead. It felt like the young man was burning inside her. His body was so hot, it was as if his whole body was on fire. The girl in herself quickly moved her to the bed and laid her down. Sama said that he should be undressed immediately to let his body cool down a bit. Leah thought that if she stretched the buttons, it would be a very long time. So she ripped the shirt open on him with force. Her look was very surprised. She was just dumbfounded. She had never seen such a thing before. His body was covered in ornaments. Leah was sure she had definitely broken the curse by now. And the girl asked the owl how to understand it. The owl said that the curse had taken hold of him again. Even if she put in all her power without a trace, the curse would soon break through again. The girl was surprised. Would it really happen again? But why does it keep happening? Because something kept stimulating it, and they couldn't figure out what it was. A curse that takes hold again and again. A blast of curse that never stops. Could it really be all of this? And the girl remembered the day it had raged. Due to a curse that suddenly got out of control, Dillion went on a rampage and destroyed the village without a trace, thereby jeopardizing the position of the entire ducal family. There was a brief mention of the incident. Then it's a curse amplifier. Well, Leah isn't entirely sure because there's not enough information, but given the circumstances, it must be a drug designed to intensify the curse, brand him as a murderer and remove him as head. It's a kind of drug that is literally a constant. If Dillion's curse intensified, the assassins would surely die first, so they had come up with such a crazy plan. Only the girl couldn't remember who had come up with it. At that time, Leah brought her hand up to the Dillion. She touched it with her finger and thought it must hurt. Her hand was enveloped in some kind of glow. She had no idea how much pain he was in right now, and she touched her hand to his chest. At this moment, the young man sighed heavily. That's what Leah thought. It wouldn't be enough. There's no guarantee that something like this won't happen in the future. It will only get worse and the assassination attempts will not stop. And Leah thought about it. She really needed her friend, us. But she didn't know exactly where she was or what she was doing, so there was no way to contact her. In that case, there was only one thing to do. Leah asked the owl to bring her a pen and paper, and the girl asked if any carrier pigeon could fly in this weather. Did she really want to get in touch with May? It was just genius Mamie Altran wizardry. She was her neighbor's cousin. She was also a very close friend of Leah's. This time she was sending a letter A. May to a different person. The man who, along with her friend, was hailed as a genius. It's his help that she needs. Sama asked if she would need to fly the magic tower. Leah said yes, and only there can you find the right person. All she said was that she'd see if anyone could fly there. And Leah, sitting at the young man's bedside, thought that trouble does not come alone. Not only does the problem with the Dillion curse need to be resolved, but there are suspicious people targeting him and monsters swarming around. The shield might give some time. No, it has to come quickly, because then she's not going to be able to do anything at all. Night has fallen. At that moment, he opened his eyes. He came to his senses. He woke up after everything that had happened. He opened his eyes and tried to come to his senses, and it was necessary to notice that he was now lying on a bed, covered with a cloak. And beside him, a lily lay sleeping in his arms. At that moment, the young man called out to the girl. I jumped up quickly. She asked if he realized how scared she had just been. She really was that scared. He apologized for waking her up. I also apologized for making her worry. Dillion felt great, as if nothing had ever happened. Leah asked him not to apologize. After all, it was all the fault of the people who came. She also explained to him that he had received a dose of a certain drug, or I said the arrow that hit him had a curse enhancer on it. It's a special substance that amplifies the curse that exploded, and Leah asked Dillion if he remembered anything. The young man only remembered, well, an arrow that he couldn't dodge, and he suddenly lost control. But he remembers devouring everything he could find. It was very unpleasant that he couldn't control his body. Leah became very sad. I said that everything was fine now, so we could relax. She was almost done, so she asked the young man to lie down and sleep further. At that moment, the young man asked what kind of power the girl was using on him. Leah said that it was a divine power. And the young man knew at once that this was the secret she was trying to hide. If it was, and would he really use it against her? Dillion said he would never do that. I said I really hope so. And it didn't really matter. She'd be long gone by then. At this time, Dillion was looking at Leah carefully. He said she had a cut on her cheek. The girl said it was from a broken window, and it looks like a piece of shrapnel hit her cheek. And Leah quickly touched her cheek with her finger. She had said that divine power healed such trifles quickly. Dillion was stunned. Before his eyes, the cut had simply healed. There wasn't a trace of it left. How is that possible? The young man said that next time she should treat her wounds first, and Ars asked if the scar on his cheek would remain, but the girl said it would be serious early on, and so she treated it first. The girl said he was completely unaware of what was happening to him. He had a high fever and the curse had eaten him up. As the girl remembered it, tears came to her eyes again. She was very much worried. He was still moaning in pain, even unconscious. Next time the girl asked the young man not to resist like that. The young man said that the girl was very kind, but why did she worry him so much? She's also very friendly, and very well with warmth towards him, and he was really interested in her. Leah sat by the dealer's bedside and held his hand. After a little thought, she said that already done, she quickly removed her hand from his. The girl said it shouldn't hurt anymore, but she did not finish as the Dillion took her hand again. He quickly grabbed her hand and tucked her in beside him. He hugged her tightly and held her close. I didn't understand what the young man was doing at that moment. I told Ars that he was very cold. It was thanks to him that all the windows in the house were broken. The girl said she would bring another blanket, so she asked him to relax his arms a little. But the boy said he was very cold. That's why his hands are a little clenched, And the young man said, "Does she know? What's the name of his curse?" Leah wanted to hear very badly. The curse of Dillion has no specific name. Because of the fact that it was nothing could fill it, everyone called it empty. Empty? That's why it's always looking for something. So they lay cuddled together on the bed, both of them warm and cozy. Terrible. And Dillion buried his face in the girl's hair. But that absolutely does not mean there is no way. Even if the curse cannot be completely lifted, it can be calmed. The young man inquired how it could be done. Everything can be done only with the help of divine power. And Leah mentally thought it was possible. But for that, the young man had to open his heart and accept her. The young man asked, "Is that really the way she broke the curse?" Leah said it was exactly like that. So whenever he sees her, to him. And at that moment the young man fell silent. He couldn't think of what to say. And Leah got very curious. What exactly he wanted to say, after all, he had intrigued her. But Dillion was silent. Leah asked why, but he was silent and didn't finish. At this time, Leah turned to the young man. But he remained silent. The girl turned round and saw that the boy was probably asleep. He fell asleep, hugging her tightly. How stunned Leah was. How was she going to get out of his arms now? And the girl closed her eyes. She tried to turn to the Dillion. If he was going to sleep, at least he could loosen his grip first. How's she going to get out now? At this point, he began to twist around in the bed. He sighed heavily. At this point, he opened his eyes and didn't realize what was going on. He looked carefully and saw that Leah was sleeping next to him. He tried to turn to the girl, but she was already fast asleep. The young man wondered if they had been lying here together all this time. At that time, the young man heard the voice of an owl. She said at last he was awake. She also called the young man an unashamed lecher. The owl looked very sour. At this time, she herself flew up to the young man and started pecking him and scratching him with her claws. She asked him how he dared to take advantage of her absence and attack the line. But the young man did not understand what nonsense the owl was talking about. She told him that he seduced a girl and hugged her. What kind of hypocrite he is. The young man was surprised. Had he really hugged her? But he didn't remember anything like that. And so his memory of the episode when he hugged Leah tightly. She kept pecking him and calling him a bastard. Dillion's mind was scrolling through why he'd done that. He had no memory of it at all. He wasn't one for physical contact, was he? I think that was true even before he lost his memory. But why is this woman the exception? And it's not just this time. She always has a strange effect on him somehow. The girl stretched sweetly and rolled over onto her back. Dillion sat up and looked at her sleeping. He just couldn't take his eyes off her. Her scent was something else. When he inhaled her scent, he was strangely relaxed. And from the moment he opened his eyes, from the moment he saw Leah Dillion, he thought she was a witch who had bewitched him, but she turned out to be his savior. She healed him when he was on death's doorstep. She also delivered him from a mad curse. More to the point, and the young man scratched the spot where he once had a tattoo. Unlike last night when he'd fought the pain, he wasn't in any pain at all right now. None of the nasty feeling he'd had when the curse was out of control. He never wanted to feel like that again, if he could put that abomination to sleep. The girl slept peacefully and heard and saw nothing. Dillion looked at the sleeping girl once more. This girl, she was definitely, and he remembered the look on her face and when he'd grabbed her the first time. The way she looked at him when he couldn't control himself. Dillion clutched his head. He definitely has feelings for this girl. Well, to what extent? He thought it was just a thank you to the person who cared for him. And he remembered how Leah had carefully etched his food for him. He stood there watching her every move. She was beautiful. But what if it isn't? Though ours has time and again denied it. Her Nasha slammed her fist on the table. What if there's an owl in everything? If that's what it is, that feeling called love. And if you remember her attitude towards him last night, she said he didn't know what was wrong with him. But she was very worried about him. And the young man was 100% sure that she loved him too. But why does she keep pushing him away? So the young man turned to the fat owl. He said he had one question for her. Asked to imagine lovers, they have a good relationship, but the woman keeps pushing the man away. She doesn't even explain why or what the reason is. Maybe she just fell out of love with him. However, because of her behavior, he is constantly in doubt. The man puts her in danger, but she still stays with him. The owl thought it was strange too. The bird assumed that the woman still had feelings for him. Then perhaps her family is against her. And the young man wondered, could her family be against her? Who's her family? Bird said they don't know what their status is. But if the difference is big, the rich family may demand to break the relationship. Bird was a fanatic of love affairs. The young man wondered. Maybe status really is the reason. And the young man remembered how he had been shouted at for not thinking of becoming the head of the family. And someone shouted that this was his place. But the young man heard everything and didn't understand. Dillion hesitated for a moment. According to his words, he's a nobleman. Then what the bird was saying now made sense. To continue with your story. A kind-hearted woman of low social status might think that she would hinder a man's future and repel him. So should he really follow the will of a woman? But it was all rubbish. If he ran away, he would be the worst kind of coward, for love is above all things. And the bird said they must overcome all adversity, and she folded her wings. Dillion at this moment was listening more attentively than ever to the bird. The young man said that the bird was right as always, and thanks to her he put his thoughts in order. The sacred scripture says that guardian spirits are like wise men, so it is true. And Dillion looked intently at the sleeping Leah. He admired her, and everything makes sense to him now. She did it because she loves him too much. There's no other way to explain it. Whether the greenhouse was in a terrible state, all the windows in the greenhouse were broken. Flowers were scattered all over the greenhouse. The young man and the boy walked up to the greenhouse. Line was very upset. Because of the broken windows, it's many times colder here. Those people broke the defense stone during the attack, so it's going to be much colder now. They don't even have windows to keep the heat in. At this point, Dillion was all wrapped up. He was wearing several jumpers and a scarf as well. Now he understood why she made him wear only clothes. Seeing the greenhouse, Leah cried. The bird soothed her and said the flowers could be replanted. It'd be great if it worked out. My babies. And she said it's a shame about the mums. Eventually, Leon went into berserk mode and made a real mess of the place. There wasn't a single plant left intact, crying because she'd worked so hard to grow them. At that time, an owl approached the girl. She said that the girl would be able to restore them with the help of divine power, so she asked her not to cry. The girl was very, very cold. She tried to warm herself with her hands, but it was not very good. Moment a Million handed her a warm scarf, said that if it was cold, she could wear this. The girl was stunned. Line said no. She asked to take the scarf back. After all, it was his scarf. At that time, the young man had already tied the scarf around the girl's neck. He said it was not worth separating things into his and hers in their relationship. The girl was surprised. What does it mean in their relationship? He was just a guest in her house after all, a patient at the very least. Is there anything more between them? And the young man only looked at her intently, and it was as if a glow appeared around the young man as Leah looked at him. She didn't understand why he was smiling so mysteriously. At that moment, her face flushed again. You can't be so dazzling, she thought. Every time she looked at him, her face flushed with color. At that moment, Leah grabbed in her arms. The bird asked her what was wrong. The girl suddenly felt something ominous. The bird didn't know what she was talking about, and the girl herself didn't know, just suddenly had a very strange feeling. After standing for a bit, she began to sweep with her broom as if she was cleaning up now. After that, she looked back and looked at Dillion. The man was looking out of the window. The girl asked what he was looking at so intently. The boy said that someone was approaching their house. Leah ran up and looked out the window dumbfounded. Could it really be them again? Outside the window, two human figures twinkled. Could it be that they had managed to climb so deep into the mountains without equipment? Perhaps they do not intend to retreat so easily, and Leah decided to deal with them as quickly as possible. She clenched the broom in her hand. The girl asked Dillion to stay in the greenhouse this time. The boy said that it was too dangerous to go alone. But if the boy went with her, it would be much more dangerous. What if this time it was the real villagers? They might have a problem if they saw him. The girl said that if she suspected something wrong, she would scream. So once again, she asked him to wait here, and the girl quickly went outside. At that moment, a man and a girl approached. They immediately apologized. Leah asked why they had come here. She had a shovel in her hand. She asked the people through the fence without opening the gate, and at that moment the girl said that they were looking for a man, and the girl's hand reached into her pocket. Leah wondered if she was planning to pull out a weapon, putting her guard down. But at that moment, the girl pulled a photograph out of her pocket and held it out to Leah. Dillion was in the picture. The girl asked if she had seen him by chance. I looked at the picture carefully. It's not like she can give it away now. After that, she slowly shifted her gaze to the girl. After that, Leah said that she couldn't say, because she hadn't been out much because of the heavy snowfall. The girl asked if there were any other people around who could be asked. Leah pointed her finger into the forest. She said there were huts not far from here that way, but they were all empty. At this point, the girl and the guy looked over at each other. The girl said she wanted to ask her some more. The girl asked what had happened to her house, and at that moment, Leah wondered, what should she say now? After all, almost all the windows in the hut were broken and it looked strange. After a little thought, the girl said that her house had been haunted by monsters last night. She told the two of them to be careful too. After all, that forest up the road is literally crawling with monsters. Careless, unarmed, or wounded travelers usually become their dinner. The guy and the girl were just dumbfounded. For a few minutes, they stared at the girl in silence. Afterwards, they said thank you very much. They also apologized for the inconvenience. They quickly turned around and started to leave. Leah only reached the door and looked back, but the people were nowhere to be found. It was strange that they had risen so quickly. They were already out of sight. These people were quite different from those who had come yesterday. Dillion thought so too. At this time, Leah just twitched. She hadn't expected to see a Dillion here. He was probably standing somewhere nearby listening to everything. But these people really were different. The girl told the boy not to go outside, and he disobeyed her again. Dillion said he was very worried about her. That's why he couldn't sit idly in the greenhouse. Leah didn't understand what had happened to him, why he was suddenly drawn to such sweet talk. Maybe he's still not himself, or is it just the aftermath of what happened earlier? At that moment, the young man turned to Leah. He took her hand gently. He said, "What if something had happened to her?" The girl looked into his eyes in surprise. Why was he worrying about her right now? If it were him, he'd better worry about himself. She said she could worry about him instead. At that moment, the girl told the young man to hurry up and get inside, and don't talk rubbish, and they staggered into the house together. It was getting dark outside. Everything was covered with snow. There were trees and bushes in the snow. It was beautiful outside. Dillion said there is very good audibility here, in case they didn't know. The young man said rather come out for the bushes. A rustling could be heard in the bushes, and so those two men came out from behind the bushes. They were the same people who had come in this afternoon. Dillion crossed his arms and stood looking at them. One of them looked like a knight and the other a mage coming out. And from the looks of it, knight is an unusual man. The young man turned his attention to his sword. His sword looked very impressive. It would be wonderful to be able to get him. Dillion didn't know what he should do now, and the young man thought it necessary first to strike the... But at that moment, the knight sank to his knees. He took off his hood from introducing himself. His name was Eldman Carlton. The girl also introduced herself. Her name was Kanai Heel. They crouched down on one knee and saluted the Dillion. They greeted his lordship. Dillion didn't even expect this kind of behavior from these people. At this time, the knight asked the young man he was probably not feeling very well. Or rather, they were very glad that he was all right. He seemed to be in good health. The girl noted that he looked much better now than he had when he was at the manor. What if he was healed while he was here? The knight looked at Dillion carefully. At that moment, he and the girl bowed. They apologized for their inattention. After all, the attack was unexpected. They still made missteps by letting their guard down. They put Dillion in danger because heads right now. It would be fully deserved. And the boy and the girl bowed their heads. You should have defended him properly. It's all their fault. After the gentleman was hurt, instead of temporarily putting him in a hotel room. Well, as soon as we got back there after the fight, he was gone. They immediately rushed out to look for him, but it suddenly started snowing heavily, and they didn't go wandering around the neighborhood calling for him. But they had to retreat, for they could hardly see anything in such a blizzard. It's been 7 days since their search, and now they finally found their master. The knight was surprised why his lordship had remained silent until now, so he turned to him once more. The girl youth raised his eyes and looked at the Dillion. His appearance was terrifying. He was literally weighed down, at which point Dillion remembered the last attack. It showed that someone was trying hard to get to him. At this time, the knight addressed his lordship again. But the young man was only glad that thanks to this man and girl, he finally had an approximate idea of himself. So he's a duke. Dillion thought for a moment. There are only 3 duchies in the Rohheim Empire, so we just need to check which one he belongs to. At that moment, the young man turned to the Ealdman. He asked him to tell him in confidence who he was. The young man said that his lordship was their unchanging master, and also the only lord of the lands of the Sinis clan. These words surprised Dillion very much. The young man even smiled. He hadn't expected to hear such a thing. And here was the missing piece of the puzzle that Leah had been so careful to keep from him. Sinis, where is it? This duchy is so powerful that it alarms the imperial family by its mere existence. All this time he had been tormented by doubts, but now the situation was finally clear. Though he could clearly feel her warmth, Leah persisted in pushing him away. She'd always told Dillion that he couldn't stay here for long. He always felt like she was trying to hide something from him. By the way, it turns out those words of Nathan were very close to the truth. If the couple is in a position of strong social inequality, but the girl's heart is good, she may push her lover away for fear of jeopardizing a bright future. If he does that, the guy's a complete coward. The bird was probably right. After all, she really could be estranged from him because of the difference in status, because he seems to be of noble blood. But he certainly didn't disgust her, and yet someone was determined to catch him. And they're supposedly his subordinates, whom he has absolutely no recollection of, because now he can't tell friend from foe. In this situation, the surest choice would be to send them away, and the young man said that right now it would be better for them to go back without him. The knight was surprised. How is that possible? Everyone is waiting for his return, but the master said it's not in his plans for now. That was right. Now was not the time, because now he's immersed in something called love. He couldn't just leave her. He's perfectly content to be around her for now. If she really becomes his lover, even with the memory loss, I can't leave her. So first he wants to find out if the feeling for him is sincere or not, whether she really loves him. One day he will really have to leave this house, because he is the master of other lands. But now his main task is to get his memory back as soon as possible. The knight said that he needed to return as soon as possible. The crown prince, after all, could make it a reason for, and the knight covered his mouth with his hand. But Dillion was undeterred. He said it was an order, and orders are not negotiable. And he once again told the knight and the girl to go back immediately. The knight said they would obey his order. Also, Dillion asked to keep the knight's sword. The knight was. But there was nothing left for him to do but give up his sword. And he handed it to Dillion. And the knight also gave his dagger. And the knight gave him his dagger as well. But the knight was outraged, and now he would be left completely unarmed. Dillion thought that this dagger should be given to Lei. She's very good with a bow. And the young man thought learning to wield a dagger wouldn't be too difficult for her. At that moment, he smiled. At that, the knight and the girl exchanged a glance. They turned around and said that they were currently staying at the village inn, and if suddenly the host thought of returning too. Dillion interrupted the young man half-heartedly. He asked that they not come here. He would come back himself when the time was right, and if by chance they happen to cross paths, let them pretend they don't know him at all. After these words, the gentleman turned round and slammed the door. The knight smiled. He said that their lord had not changed a bit. The girl and the little ones began to think about what they should do now, but they didn't have a lot of options. They can only follow his will.